I'm John Teslow. I'm originally from Iowa, I guess you could say. I like to start out with my dad. He he was from northeast Iowa, a little town called Decorah, and he joined the Navy in 1939, and he was stationed in Hawaii, and he was on the Arizona. And I think it's important that everybody know about him. He was in the number 3 gun turret. And if you've ever been to the Arizona Memorial, it's the large gun turret that sticks above the water. That was his gun turret, number 3 gun turret that he was assigned to. And on the morning of December 7th, 1941, he was sitting down writing a letter home when general quarters sounded, and he ran to his battle station, which was that number 3 gun turret. And he said shortly thereafter, they announced that it was a call to abandon ship, and he didn't know what was going on. When they came out, they saw the destruction of the Arizona had been blown in half, basically, and sunk. And they were so well protected in that gun turret that they had no idea that was that way. So anyway, he went on, and as the war went on, there were only 342 survivors on that ship, but not all of them were on board ship. Many of them were on shore duty, ship's company, bringing in stores and taking out things and stuff. So if they were within like 100 yards of the ship, they were considered on board ship. So there were fewer than 342 were actually on board. He was very lucky to survive. And that was 1939 or 1941. And his enlistment was up in 1943 in the middle of the war, so we had to ship over, re-enlist again. And when he got out in 1947, there were no jobs. Everybody had come out of the war, and they weren't giving up their jobs for anybody. And so he ended up having to go back in the Navy, and so he served until 1959. He retired in December of 58, but it was really 1959 when he got his papers. And we moved from San Diego, 70-degree weather, and I was attending a junior high there with about 500 kids in it. And so we moved back to Decorah in December, and it was like 15 degrees, 10 degrees. It was just brutal. Moved to a farm. And I went to Bell School number 3, which had my first cousin and I were the only ones in the 8th grade. So it was a bit of a culture shock. And anyway, I'm sorry I've been rambling on, but that was my introduction to Iowa. So I was on a farm in high school, and 10 days, 12 days after high school, I joined the Navy. I said, get me off this farm. I'm tired of getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and milking cows and coming back at night, 5 o'clock, and milking cows. And so I get in the Navy, and they start waking me up at 3 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the morning. I go, what the hell is this? I didn't want this. And but I went, and they stationed me in Texas. First in Beeville, Texas, and then transferred down to Corpus Christi, Texas. And it was while I was in Texas, I was in the crash crew, firefighter, crash fire and rescue. And we were stationed at an old, it's called an auxiliary landing field, Waldron Field. And one day the chief came in and said, hey, go out next door to the room next door and paint it. You always got to do something in the Navy. They got to keep you busy. So me and another guy went in and painted the walls. They had to give it 2 coats of oil paint, and you're using rollers and trying to get it done, and droplets of paint fall on the floor. And the chief told us to get some avgas, which was, we had a tank out in back of the hangar. Get some avgas and scrub that floor down and get it clean. So we went and got 2 containers, a trash can and a bucket of avgas. And he told the head airman, go in and shut the water heater off. So, and then we're in this room. It's about 20 feet wide and about 20 feet long and about 15 feet wide. And we're scrubbing the floor, and for some reason, both doors were closed. The outside door was blocked off, so there's no entry to get in or out. And the door to get into the room had a real shaky handle, and it was an old hangar, World War II. So we had that door closed, and we're scrubbing the floor, and I looked up and I looked at the water heater for some reason. And then in my mind's eye, I saw a flame drop from the bottom of the water heater down to the floor, which is about that far, and form a little fire ring about that big. And it got about that big, and then a tongue of it shot out, and then it blew up. Well, I put my brush down, I walked over and I opened the door, and I said, it's getting stuffy in here, I got to open this door. I opened the door, I went back, I picked up the brush, scrubbing the floor, and I looked at the water heater, and that drip of fire fell out the bottom of the water heater. By the time I got the word out, fire, the room had exploded. I had made it to the door, and the explosion was so intense that it blew fire about this far underneath the wall out, and they had pipes running through the wall, water pipes and stuff. It blew fire out the rings that surrounded the pipes through the wall. And then right next door was the table where everybody ate and played cards and stuff. They knew there was a fire before I got it out of my mouth. The crash truck was sitting 10 feet away. I got out without even singeing a hair. The other guy tripped over the gas can and spent 3 months in the hospital. He came out, he had skin hanging off of his arms. And he was very lucky to get out alive. But we were able to get the fire put out before the building lost, but it was still horrendous. So I got out of the Navy in 1966 and did different jobs and stuff, and decided I was going to go back to school, get an education. I did terrible in high school, but I went to Kirkwood Community College in Cedar Rapids, and they had a program there to help transitional development, they called it, for people who did terrible in high school because they could develop into college students. And so I took that course, and then I got an Associate of Arts from Kirkwood, and then I went to Mankato State, was going to go into being an attorney. Well, I took a couple of law classes, and I knew that was definitely not for me. So I ended up dropping out of school and came back to Kirkwood, and I didn't know what to do. And a friend of mine had gone through the dental technology program there. It was a pretty intensive 2-year program. And I said, yeah, maybe I'll do that. At least I can do something with my hands. And so I did that, graduated in 1973. With a degree in dental technology and Associate of Applied Science. And was living in Cedar Rapids, and my wife came home one day and said, I want to learn to meditate. And I went, yeah, okay. She said, no. She says, we're going to learn to meditate. So I learned to meditate, transcendental meditation, 2nd of December, 1973. And out of the marriage, that's the only good thing that came out of it. Shortly thereafter, I was on my own again, and So I worked in various places. I worked in Cedar Rapids, and then went up to Waterloo and worked, and then in Oldwine, which is a small town in northeast Iowa. I went up there and worked. And that was the winter of 1976, 77, where we had just the most brutally cold winter we'd ever experienced. They had, in Oldwine, they had water mains that were buried 8 feet deep were freezing and cracking. And after spending all that time there and all that cold weather, I decided, San Diego, I remember that was a pretty nice place. So I packed up and moved to San Diego in 1977. And so I was there in San Diego, and at the time I was smoking. Everybody smoked back then, it seemed like. And I said, yeah, I'm going to quit smoking, but every time I try to quit, it messes up my meditation. So I'm just going to wait. I'll start meditating again. And I did it on and off. It wasn't just, wow, sit down and meditate for the first time and never going to miss. I was kind of drug into it. So I sat there and decided, yeah, I'll go ahead. As soon as I quit smoking, I'll start meditating again. So about a month and a half later, I get a check from the IRS for $400. And they had a program in San Diego, the SHIC Center. It was a SHIC aversion therapy for quitting smoking. It was $400. So I took it down there and quit smoking in April of 1978. And about 3 weeks later, I got another job. And this time it was in La Jolla, in Bird Rock, La Jolla. And I had to drive by this building every day, and it said TM Center. And I kept, maybe I got to stop in there and see what's going on. So I stopped in after about a month or so driving by, and I walked in and I said, hey, what's going on with this? He says, let's come on in, sit down, we'll talk. So we're talking, and I had heard about the cities. They had it on TV. They announced that they had some flyers come out. They were going to show how to fly and stuff. I said, what about the cities thing? He said, it's cities, and this is what it is. And I said, well, how do I get into that? And he says, well, you have to have been meditating regularly for 3 months. And I said, 3 months? He says, yeah, twice a day twice a day for 3 months. It was such a shock. And then he says, well, and then you have to take an SCI course, which is, more knowledge. And so I thought about it, yeah, all right, I can do this. So, and I didn't miss a meditation that whole time. I took SCI and I got my cities. In I was CIC 3. I was supposed to be CIC 2, but they forgot to tell me, which never happened before. So I did the CIC 3, and I got my flying block the next year up at Cobb Mountain. And so for about 5 years, I was in San Diego, happily doing my meditation, my cities, and enjoying myself, beautiful weather, and had a house. And my parents had passed away. And a friend of mine came out from Fairfield, the only one I'd ever met. I knew one person in Fairfield, and she was Diana Cohen. She was a student here. And she came out to San Diego. She had an uncle out there, and she came in, and she came to visit. And she says, well, I was thinking about moving up to Oregon, getting tired of California stuff. She says, well, why not move to Fairfield? And then I had heard Marcia say we should come to Fairfield. And I just, oh man, Iowa weather. Oh God, do I want to do this? So in 1984, for the 5,000 course, it wasn't the first big 7,000 course. It was the next one we held in June. I moved out. And I've been here pretty much ever since. 40 years. So I was living in San Diego after getting in the cities, and I heard about this fellow, Charlie Lutz. He was giving lectures down in San Diego, and he was also giving lectures up in Santa Monica, I think it was, up in LA. And he came down to San Diego, and so I went to see him. And every time, and I saw Charlie probably a dozen times after that through the years. Every time I saw him, he answered a question if I had something on my mind, and he did it mental telepathy wise. You know, it was answered in my mind every single time. A lot of times I didn't want to hear the answer, but he was always a gentleman. He ought to be the first saint of the movement. I mean, the man did so much he helped so many people stay on the path. And that's always he talked about, staying on the path, do your program, follow Maharishi. Now there was a story he told about, there was a group of people that were trying to decide how to keep the movement in the United States under somewhat control, keep them civilized and doing the right thing and stuff. So they evidently met, and I'm not sure exactly where they were meeting, but they decided that they were going to maintain control of the movement by fear, that they were going to have various things that they did, like telling you, you're going to get kicked out of this course if you don't do this, if you don't follow our rules. And they were also, I think, going to take over, they wanted to take over the movement in the United States. And they asked Charlie if he wanted to join them. And he said, I would much rather fail with Maharishi than succeed with you guys. And so that's the kind of a person Charlie was. He was dedicated to Maharishi, period. And every time I saw him, it was always a good thing. He told some wild stories and people asked weird questions and stuff, but he was always true to the teachings of Maharishi. A wonderful man. I'm glad I got to meet him. So, and I should probably not say this, but I'm going to tell you the story about when I learned to meditate in 73. I was living in Cedar Rapids, and Maharishi came here, I think in March of 74, sometime in 74, for the dedication of MIU, and that was 90 miles away. And I said, I just started meditating. I didn't know how important it was. I said, that's too far to go. I'll see him some other time. Oh my God. I had a chance to see Maharishi and didn't do it. And I just, every time I think about it, I hang my head and shake my head. That's one of my big regrets. So I'm certainly glad I learned TM. It helped me settle me down. I had a very, I should probably tell you about when I was a kid, when I was in first grade, my dad was in Japan, stationed in Japan, and we were living in Redwood City, I think at the time. Maybe it was Chula Vista. I think maybe it was Chula Vista at the time. And so we decided we were going to move over there and be with my dad. Well, I had to get all of the injections, the vaccinations that the regular troops got for going overseas. And I don't know, there were 12, 15, 20 of them. There were a lot of them. And we got those injections, and it put me into Asperger's disease. I was a normal kid, and then I was hyperactive. I couldn't settle down. It was bouncing off of walls. And that followed me my whole life. The only thing that settled me down was smoking pot. And I started that in 1967 and continued until 1973. And another thing about learning meditation, you had to stop smoking pot for 2 weeks. So it took me several months before I was able to get to that point. And so I stopped smoking pot and learned TM. And that's the only thing that settled me down. And I was literally going nuts, bouncing off of walls. There was nothing that was helping. They put me on Valium for a while, and that became almost addictive, so I had to quit that. But I mean, thank God for TM. So all those people out there that say I'm going to hell because I'm a meditator and all that, you're really missing the point. So I wish you all well. Godspeed. So I was here in 1984. I moved in, and they had a Bell project that they were casting. They wanted to cast all the furniture to hold this bell that they were having made in the Philippines. And they asked for people who had metalworking experience. And since I had been a dental technician for all these years, I went down and volunteered. And so for like 3 days straight, without very little sleep, I worked on these bell project things. And that got me interested in doing more metal work. I liked dental technology. I just didn't like working for dentists. They're just really a different breed. So I got to looking around, and I saw a book on making knives. And I got that book and read it and just got fascinated by it. Made a couple of calls, and this one gentleman I called said, well, there's a knife making course going on at Rochester Institute of Technology. It's a 2-week course, and it's taught by a world-class knife maker, Bill Moran. And so I said, oh, I'm going to look into that. So I did, and I signed up for the course, and we drove out there, and it was forging knives and making knives, and it was absolutely unbelievable. It was such an eye-opening experience that when I walked into the dormitory where we were staying, Bill Moran was in there, and he was talking to a few students, and he was passing around this knife that he had made, and it's called his ST-23. It's a fighting knife, and he handed it to me. And you know, when you hand something to someone, they automatically judge the weight of it to adjust. I mean, you know how much it's going to approximately weigh, so you don't drop it or you don't, He handed me that knife, and when he handed it to me, my hand went up like that. It just didn't have any weight to it at all, and it was a big knife. And I was just amazed. How are you able to do that? And he says, that's what we're going to teach you in the class. And he did, and it was a wonderful, wonderful class. So that was in 85 that I took that class. I took it again in 1986. And then I got into blacksmithing. Since it was forging the knife, you had to get all the blacksmithing equipment anyway. I had gotten some equipment and started forging. So there was another blacksmithing instructor, Frank Turley, in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He had the only school at the time in the United States, but it was 6 weeks long. And so I arranged some things and told the dentist I wasn't going to be around. I'm going on vacation for a couple of months. I went out to Santa Fe and took his blacksmithing course. And then at the end of the blacksmithing course, I drove over to John C. Campbell Folk School, where they were teaching how to build a log home the old-fashioned way with a broad axe and having a dovetail corners. And I took that at the that was a 2-week course. So I came back to Iowa and started blacksmithing and hunting down blacksmithing equipment. And I did that for about 15 years. And then in 2001, I suffered a major stroke. I had a stroke that put me in the hospital for 3 months and basically ended my blacksmithing career and my dental technology career. And I've been basically unemployed and on disability since then. And in 2001 or 2006, Marcia came out and said, we're going to have an Invincible America assembly, and would you like to get on that? You invited us all on that. So I came on that. That was in July of 2006, and here it is, September 25th, 2024, and I've been on it continuously ever since the day it started. So I lost a good friend of mine here last month. He's my next door neighbor. His name was Ralph Clutter, and he was a long-time meditator. He'd been in town for years and years and years, I think since 1980 or something like that. Ralph, when he was a young kid, his father died when he was young. And Ralph had a paper route, one of the stories he told us. He had a paper route, and he would do his paper route, and at the end of the paper route was a little drugstore, a gas station or something. He would pick up a bottle of Coke for a nickel. Then he would ride back up, drink the Coke on his way home, and just before he got home, he would drop the Coke bottle off for 3 cents. So he was real proud of himself. He got the Coke for 2 cents. And he was a very, very smart individual. His brother Ted, who was here for the cleaning out the house and settling his affairs, told us that Ralph he was the highest scoring, or got the award for geometry and for, gosh, I can't think, it was another 2 math things. And he was into astronomy and rocketry, and he was a kid that was really smart and devious. He got into a lot of things, and he talked about making rockets and blowing things up. He seemed to go through a phase of blowing things up. And one of the things he did was he was a locksmith on campus for years and years. And he still had this thing about he needed to have some money. They didn't make much money on campus, but he would go to the laundromat. He would unscrew the agitators in the laundry room, and he would go down there and get all the change. And he did that every couple of weeks. He said he'd clean it out, all of the washers. And he was always getting things to sell. He would collect things, and then he would run back to Ohio with a friend of his. They would go to a flea market and sell the stuff. And he told about one of the jobs he had before he came out to Fairfield was working for a friend of his, and they started selling pickles on a stick at the fair. And he said they sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pickles. So everywhere you go, you'd see these sticks with a piece of paper stuck on it, thrown away. He said they'd buy these large jars of pickles, and they sold them for, I don't know, $0.25 a piece or something, a ridiculous price. He said they made just tons of money. And he was always doing something like that. And he got married to a Turkish girl who was teaching at MIU school. And he moved to Turkey for 3 years. And it got to a point where evidently Turkish law, or Islamic law states that when the husband dies, or if the woman dies, everything goes to the husband. There was some thing in the law that she had children from a prior marriage, and they decided that Ralph is more comfortable in the United States, and she wanted to stay in Turkey, and so they got a technical divorce. They weren't really divorced in the heart, but on paper they got divorced. They saw each other all the time, and Ralph would come back and see her, and she would come here and visit him. So Ralph bought a house, and next to where I live now, and a couple of years later he talked me into buying the house next to him. So we're neighbors, and Ralph had gone to Turkey about 3 years ago, I think, to visit his wife. And he was sitting on the couch, and he wasn't feeling well. He just said, I'm tired. I think I'll go in and take a nap. And her apartment is quite a large apartment. And he's walking down the hallway of the apartment and passed out. Found himself in a tunnel, going down a tunnel. And all of a sudden, he jumped up and he said, inside, he jolted awake, and he said, oh, hell no, hell no. And came back. I hope people can do that, but I don't know if they can. But he came back and then went to the doctor, and they found out that he had blockages in his heart. So they did. He came back to the United States, and they did a quadruple bypass on him, and he just never fully recovered. He was always a vibrant, let's go, get it done person. And so he got this operation, and he just never got full strength back. And he coasted for about 2.5 years, and then he just kind of lost his balance a couple of times. He said these were ischemic, or whatever they are, strokes on the surface of the brain. That's not how he was getting. He was thinking that's what he had, and he wasn't. It was much serious than that. And that went on for a couple of weeks. And one day he couldn't get up in the dome. We had to get the wheelchair and get him up. Got him home. And got him to his car, and he drove home, and he said it was okay. Well, I went over and saw him. I said, okay, that's it. Tomorrow I'm taking you to the hospital, emergency room up in Iowa City. He said, okay. So I took him up there, and on the way there, he told me something 3 times while we were in the car. And I mentioned to him that he had done that, and he said, you're not kidding me, are you? I said, no. Well, we got into the hospital, and they put him in the emergency room, and he died 5 days later. So, but he was a trooper. The guy was a trooper, really nice man. I miss him a great deal, but life goes on. So, yeah, he's a good man.